So I decided to go a whole week to experiment to see how well Windows Vista has held up over time. And for this prime example, I'm gonna be using this old shitty ass computer my grandma gave me. It's got a couple things going for it. It's got a DVD player. It's got a SD card reader. Something my shit don't even got. As far as specifications go, we're working with an Intel Pentium D. It's clocking at 3 gigahertz. Dual core processor. That don't sound too bad. It's got only a gig of RAM, which kind of is a little boo boo, but we're gonna work around that. And it's also got 250 gigs of space, which I'm not too worried about since I don't really need a whole lot of space anyway. Now, at first, I couldn't figure out how to get the damn thing open, but it turns out that there's a little latch which you have to pull and hold down at the same time, and then you pull it out. And then once you have access to that, I don't know, it's pretty nasty in here. It's all dusty and shit. I gotta hit it with duster and the cleanest solution, all that bullshit. But I'm gonna do that a little later off camera. But I just want y'all to see what we're working with in here. So now that y'all got a little look, we're gonna lock in. But before we do that, I'm gonna have to use my modern computer to download drivers and download the shit so I can put it on here. And then we're gonna swap it out. We're gonna lock in for a week. So let's dive right in. So somehow I was playing in the BIOS, and I'm not even sure, to be honest, how I even got in to the system. My first order of business was to go into the task manager to see how much RAM it was taking up. And so my guess was right. I mean, it definitely took up more than 50% of RAM. I kind of figured that there was some stuff loaded on here that might have been taking up that space, as well as some programs that might have been installed. So I kind of figured that maybe I wouldn't have to do a clean install if I just got rid of some stuff, which I thought would save me more time. I said, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to do a clean install of Vista just to have something fresh to work with. So once I got to doing that, I pretty much went in the BIOS and I tried to boot from it. And at first I was confused because, normally I'm used to seeing a couple different options, but it only gave me two options. So either to boot from the hard drive or the CD-ROM. So at first I was thinking like it probably doesn't support it. But my gut told me otherwise, that there's probably a hidden feature somewhere to enable it. So I ended up looking online, and then I think I hit delete and got access to the BIOS. And it turns out that it was actually hidden, so I had to enable it. So after enabling the USB feature, I thought maybe I might have had it, but it turns out that I ended up getting a message saying it only supports UEFI, and I was like, "What is UEFI?" But either way, it didn't support it. So I ended up reading online, and it turns out that I ended up changing the partition scheme to MBR. And then after that, that's when I got stuff smooth sailing. The installation took about half an hour, so it wasn't bad. But once I got it up and running, it bugged me with a serial key. Now, I did go ahead and bypass this by doing a command prompt, so it's a temporary fix. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to be using it longer than 30 days, but at least it gives me enough to work with. So after I installed Vista, I ended up formatting the USB again so I can load in all the stuff that I wanted to. But my top priority in order to make it usable was by installing an internet browser. So I wanted to see if Google Chrome, Firefox, or Opera even worked. I mean, obviously, the latest versions of Chrome and Firefox are not even supported. So I ended up tracking down an older version of those. And so when I tried to install Chrome, it didn't want to load. And same thing with Firefox. So I ended up installing Opera instead. And it worked okay, but I wasn't too fond of it. I did go in and try the YouTube app, and it worked, but not really. It kind of just kept loading. So what I ended up doing was I dug up two of my old laptops, and I thought it was in this one. This is my Dell Inspiron. This is like my most powerful Windows XP computer that I have. And I thought I installed it on here, but unfortunately I didn't. So I ended up taking out the other one. And I mean, it is kind of in rotten shape, I'm not going to lie. But I ended up finding that version of Chrome on there. So I just loaded it up on the USB, and it actually worked. So I don't have an Ethernet cable long enough to reach my box. So my only solution at this point was using a USB Wi-Fi adapter. So once I plugged it straight in, it didn't read it, obviously. So I had to hunt drivers down online. And I had an old booklet of it lying around somewhere. And I eventually found it and went to that link, and which, by the way, still works. So I clicked on it, and I was able to get the drivers up and running. But I also took the time to install a couple of other things. I did end up installing VLC, and VLC worked fine. I had no complaints about it. And a couple of my favorite games, one of which is Drag Racer V3. The other important thing to me was installing a graphics driver, because once you install Vista, you don't have one. So that's why the screen kind of looks all zoomed in. So once I found the driver, the screen looked much better. I compared this to how the computer looked before, and I'm like, bro, I did not have a graphics driver before, because now with this sick graphics driver, it's looking a lot better. I also tried my keyboard and mouse, and they actually work fine. Now I do have an audio interface that I use with my modern computer, which unfortunately doesn't work because it's designed for Windows 10 and later. So I ended up digging up some old speakers, and it kind of felt weird not having my monitors, but at least I had more space to work with. So it just kind of decluttered everything, I guess. So I decided to try and see if it can play YouTube in the background, since, I mean, that's kind of like a big thing for me when I use my modern computer. And it actually does fine. Now, there were a couple times where I had to go back and I had to go back and reload, but I also tested out the video quality to see what it can handle. And 720p, it works, but it's definitely choppy. But I mean, hey, I can get loads of time just by watching videos on here. I mean, honestly, at this point, I feel that this is something you can get by with. And I was even scrolling online just randomly, and it wasn't perfect. I did run into a few issues with some pages, but I mean, most of them to me, seem fine. I mean, yeah, it was pretty slow and, a pain in the ass at times. But, that's to be expected with an older computer. So then the last thing I wanted to do before I put this thing away by the end of the week was I ended up trying out some games that I had in my drawer. So I tried installing Call of Duty 4, and it took maybe about half an hour to like an hour. And it kept giving me an error message. So I kind of figured, I go to the store and come back. And I did. And, it still was giving me error messages, like still taking forever. I said, you know what, screw it. We're going to try something else. So I ended up trying Zuma Deluxe, which by the way was really addicting. I think I spent like almost an hour straight playing it. And then I ran The Sims. It actually ran pretty good. And then I tried some emulation, and does a great job. So I have no complaints on as far as that. So as far as what I've learned, I'm going to tell you right now. So if you were to hear anything about Vista, it's highly regarded as one of the worst versions of Windows, ever to have came out. And that was largely due to people who were coming from XP, couldn't really run Vista that well because Vista had higher system requirements. So that meant you would have had to go out and get a new computer. But even then, in the beginning, Vista kind of struggled. But that's not to say that Vista is actually, that bad. I mean, yes, it was criticized for being slow and over-engineered, and being incompatible with a lot of programs. But that doesn't necessarily mean Windows Vista was actually bad. And I mean, over time, Microsoft has made updates and tweaks to it. Vista is actually a usable, experience. And I actually think this is a good operating system. Just because something has a bad reputation doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. I can tell Microsoft tried, especially because they knew that some people were using Vista and didn't really mind. And everybody has their own, different reasons for using a computer, whether it be like surfing the web or gaming. And I mean, if I were to have picked this computer up back in 2007, and I wasn't doing any type of gaming with it, I was just using it as like a regular home computer to like browse the web, then this computer would have been fine, because I'm not worried too much about the specifications of the computer. I'm not too worried about it only having a gig of RAM, while most higher upper computers had like 2, maybe even 4 gigs. Only then would it be time to upgrade if I see everyone else upgrading, or it's just not supporting any of my programs anymore. And I mean, that's to be expected with an older computer. It's older, it's outdated, so a lot of stuff isn't going to really work anymore. And in the beginning, it can be kind of tough, especially because you have to go through and install so many things. It's really a trial and error to see what works and what doesn't. So I would honestly say, for anybody who isn't all that interested in computers, and I honestly wouldn't even recommend using Vista every day. And that's not to say that you can't. I mean, you can actually get by with it. But over time, just know that Google Chrome on here isn't going to be working exactly the same anymore. Of course, as demands get higher, eventually it's kind of like, what's the whole point of it? You can't even access the web anymore because there's simply just no use for it anymore. But I will also say that there is so much more I can do with this computer. So much more. And of the many things that I've tried doing with it in the time frame of a week, those were just prime examples. And I honestly wanted to spend more time with it. Uh, but I know how to pack things up. And so I honestly didn't want to spend a whole lot of time thinking, okay, what am I going to put on this computer, to make it a more usable experience? And of course, I could have taken the time to upgrade the hard drive, upgrade the RAM, maybe even try putting a graphics card in it. But I wanted to use it as is because I tried to put myself in the shoes of someone who doesn't have that much experience or isn't interested in computers too much, other than simply, with their mindset being that I'm going to use a computer to, just browse the web or, just play a couple games on. But I think back in 2007, this would have actually been doable. I mean, granted, it's not a warlord machine or anything like that, but it gets the job done. And that's what I like about this thing. So after experiencing Windows Vista, I ended up putting back my PC. I mean, it just looks so much better. Now, not that I got tired of using Vista, but it was just such a relief, and it honestly felt different using Windows 10 because I've gotten so used to using Vista. Despite its reputation, Vista isn't bad. It's generally better than given credit. So yeah, that about wraps up this video. And as always, I'm going to be dropping more content. I also want to thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.